Mabuhay. Welcome to Lagim, a Filipino True Crime Podcast. My name is Christine and this is episode 7, the Jang Lucero story. Before I start today's episode, I would like to ask you to follow Lagim on all its socials. We are on Instagram at Lagim Podcast, on Twitter at Lagim Pod, on TikTok at Lagim Podcast, and on Facebook. Just search for Lagim, a Filipino True Crime Podcast. There's also a Lagim Podcast discussion group on Facebook, so make sure that you search for Lagim Podcast discussion group to join like-minded true crime fans in a community. Lagim is also officially on YouTube now, so you can stream all past episodes and this one right now on YouTube. I have also set up a Patreon page for Lagim on patreon.com. You can support this little podcast of mine by becoming a patron. As of now, I only have one tier, which will allow you early access to episodes and bonus content such as Q&A episodes as soon as you subscribe. So make sure to look for Lagim Podcast on Patreon. Lastly, please also rate Lagim on Apple Podcasts to help give this little passion project of mine a boost in the algorithm. Content warning. This episode contains details of violence, physical assault, abductions, and murder. So please take care of yourself whilst listening. The COVID-19 pandemic started out as a distant piece of news out of Wuhan, China last November 2019. Initial insights from the medical professionals in Wuhan indicated that most infected people who also eventually died seemed to have been elderly or people with pre-existing medical conditions. More than a year on, the whole world seemed to have come to a grinding halt as coronavirus has permeated and keeps on permeating all aspects of our lives and essentially putting us all in a timeout corner. The pandemic has caused lots of industries to collapse, and businesses have felt the brunt of decreasing commerce. But the real effects of the economy significantly slowing down had and are still being felt by your normal working class citizen who may have lost hours at work or indeed their whole job. Robin Jang Lucero, or simply Jang, was not any different. When the quarantine orders were implemented in Calamba, Laguna, Jang eventually lost her job and was left to come up with creative ideas to make a living. She was not unintelligent. She was resourceful, so she decided to become a driver for a for-hire vehicle, which she owned anyway. This way, she had the liberty to determine her working hours and did not need to answer to anyone. She was her own boss. But Jang was not merely an entrepreneurial person. She was very much a civic-minded individual too. Jang was living openly as a bisexual woman and founded a group for fellow bi people in order to create a safe space for them. She founded the Bi Chapter Piston Club and was also a member of the Bisexual Confession Files, Tam Bai Yan. She specifically offered rides to members of the LGBTQIA community because, as a bisexual woman, she knew that they needed much more protection from perhaps fellow Filipinos who might not understand or might not want to understand the validity of a queer person's existence. Jang was most probably operating from personal experience when she decided to offer such rides. This part of Jang was commonly left out in the mainstream reporting of her story, maybe out of fear or worry that centering her bisexuality might offend the sensibilities of the common Filipino. So I would like to hold space for that in a small way as an ally of the LGBTQIA community and make people aware that Jang was not just any type of person, but she was a proud bisexual woman who had done some good for the queer community within Calamba. Sadly, Zhang, the entrepreneur and proud bi woman, was prematurely taken away from us on the night of the 28th of June, 2020. It was a fairly normal evening when Zhang picked up her then girlfriend Maya Amatorio. She dropped her off at their home in Bay Laguna and decided to leave again to pick up some passengers who booked her to travel from Calamba to Manila. Maya would later share in interviews with the press that she did not like the idea of Zhang venturing out so late that Sunday evening, but the three passengers apparently threatened to drop their booking if Zhang did not pick them up right away. Fearful of losing out on a potential big fare, seeing as the passengers hired her to drive from Calamba to Metro Manila, which is, after all, a 55-kilometer drive, she left Maya at home and drove to pick up three passengers. And that was the last time Maya said she saw Zhang alive. Maya would also later share in interviews that they indeed had a small fight about Zhang leaving so late to pick up these passengers. This detail would later become important as the police looked closely at the case. When Zhang did not come back home, Maya called her phone instantly. But instead of Zhang answering the phone, it was a police officer who asked Maya to quickly go to the police station because something had happened to Zhang. Maya, and later on the whole nation, was shocked by the news of Zhang's death and the manner in which she had died. Police initially released information that Zhang was found stabbed in her car near the bypass road in Calamba, Laguna. What truly sent shivers down people's spines was the later revelation by the police following the medical examination of Zhang that indeed Zhang sustained in total 52 stab wounds, mainly to her chest. It hinted at an attack of a personal nature or perhaps a crime of passion. The medical examination also revealed that Zhang had defense wounds, showing that she fought her assailants. Investigators, knowing the growing media interest in the case, began tracing Zhang's steps and tried putting together a timeline of the events starting from the time Zhang received messages from the potential passengers on Facebook, who were confirming that they indeed wanted to be picked up. But the police did not make progress right away. What was clear, though, was that Zhang received the messages around 9 p.m. The instructions from the potential passengers were for her to drive them to Hilpuyat in Makati City, specifically. Zhang was found dead the next day, the 29th of June. By the 30th of June, the police were more strongly convinced that they have, at this point, some potential leads that point to many motives such as robbery, revenge, a love triangle, seemingly keeping it all very general and vague. The police hinted at looking at more than one assailant and also informed the media that they had been looking at social media message exchanges between Zhang and the passengers. Even though the police kept their information flow towards the media as vague as possible, they said they were at liberty to disclose at this point that the passengers were sending messages to Zhang at around 10 p.m., after Zhang had already left Maya at their home. The passengers were asking if Zhang was still coming to pick them up, but the messages were left unread on Zhang's side, hinting at Zhang maybe already having met foul play. The police also added that when they did try to trace the passenger's Facebook account, they had already deactivated or deleted their account. They could not be traced anymore, and they could not determine who the owners of the account were. Even though the police were sometimes very vague in their disclosures to the media, they still made it a point to be very visible. from the very beginning of the case. I presume this was in an effort to appear more in control of the situation in an environment already beset with fear and uncertainty, not only due to the murder of Zhang, but also due to the pandemic. The police, it seemed to me, were very concerned of the narrative being given by the media because they presumably knew that sooner or later the masses will demand someone's head for Zhang's death. So, the police made sure to tell the people to be vigilant, to be careful to avoid booking cars or accepting bookings through social media, perhaps in an effort to use Zhang's story almost as a cautionary tale. By the end of June, things moved pretty quickly. Maya Amatorio, Zhang's girlfriend, had already given her statement by the 30th. After doing so, Maya was very willing to also give more interviews to the media. She would recount her last moments with Zhang, and she would say how she could not recall Zhang having any enemies, and so she could not understand how anyone could hurt her. As for the police, they announced later on the 30th that even though they were not making any arrests just yet, they had firmly identified persons of interest. When pressed about the identities of these persons of interest, the police declined to answer and diverted the media's attention to more speculations as to the motive or motives for Zhang's murder. They talked more about how this murder could have been a crime of passion after all, but also in the same breath how this could all be premeditated. A tad confusing or misleading, if you ask me. Again, appearing in front of the media and being as vague and general as possible was potentially just a ploy to keep the peace with a rather anxious public. It made them look like they were in control. By the 1st of July, the police had announced that witnesses had come forward and 4 individuals had now been specifically identified to be involved in Zhang's murder. 2 days later, the police released some CCTV footage of Zhang's last moments, showing the individuals presumed to have committed the crime against Zhang. In the CCTV footage, it can be seen that at 9:52 p.m., Zhang stopped on a seemingly busy road to pick up 3 passengers, 1 woman and 2 men. The female passenger joined Zhang in the front passenger seat, and the 2 men got into the back of the car. Zhang's car can then be seen to leave the pickup point, but what struck the police as odd was that a blue car immediately started following Zhang's gray car as it pulled out of the street. The CCTV footage then switched to another vantage point at the different location, and what can be seen was how these 3 passengers who Zhang just picked up were now exiting the blue car that was following Zhang's car at around 9:45. The 3 individuals then walked to a nearby parking lot of a fast food chain, where another camera caught them more clearly. The footage managed to show the 3 individuals better, but because they had masks on, it still was very difficult to identify them right away. All the police knew at this point was that witnesses were telling them that someone called Althea was the mastermind of Zhang's murder. Whether Althea was the woman who was in Zhang's car was not clear from the police's information. So what is the police's theory? The police theorized that as soon as the 3 passengers got into Zhang's car and got onto the bypass road, they immediately started hurting Zhang. They potentially managed to stop Zhang's car by the roadside and then started restraining her from the back, whilst the woman in the front passenger seat started stabbing Zhang until she died. The police further explained that the theory about Zhang being restrained by the man in the back of her car came about when the medical officer confirmed that Zhang's hands were fractured potentially from the pressure of being restrained and from fighting back. The police then continued with their theory that the blue car probably was already waiting near Zhang's car and served as a getaway car for the three individuals. The police issued a stern warning to the three individuals and offered them the opportunity to surrender themselves before the arrest warrants could be issued. Not much was heard from the police after this, but we did know that on the 6th of July, Jang Lucero was laid to rest at a humble and small gathering that did not, unfortunately, escape the attention of the press. The next day, the 7th of July, the police surprised the whole nation when they announced that they had actually already managed to arrest one of the three individuals they had been looking for on the 3rd of July. They announced that they had arrested Ann Sheila Montes Bellarmino, her being the woman apparently identified on the CCTV footage. The police explained that the tattoo seen on the female individual on the video footage resembled a tattoo that Bellarmino also had. In all this commotion of having finally arrested someone, I found it weird, though, that in an effort to appear in control, the police managed to always change a few bits of their statements to the press here and there. They said at the beginning that they were looking for 5 people, and then they said they were looking for 4, and as it turned out, there were 3 people that they ended up looking for with the guide of the CCTV footage. After Bellarmino's arrest, they again changed their statements, saying that there were actually 5 other suspects who they were looking at and looking for. I would like to think that these changes in statements were born out of progress in the investigation and out of finding out more and more about the case, but I remain skeptical. Now let us focus on Miss Bellarmino. As it turned out, Bellarmino was Maya's ex-girlfriend and they were together until February 2020. Maya then got together with Zhang, but the two were not exactly strangers to each other, according to Bellarmino. When Maya and Zhang got together in early 2020, that was actually their second go at a relationship with each other. So there was a history there already. Bellarmino explained that when she was still with Maya, she gradually noticed in early 2020 how Maya and Zhang were seemingly getting close to each other again behind her back. She said she was hurt by this, as it was, in a way, a betrayal of trust, but she was not too hurt as her feelings for Maya did not really run too deep. When sharing this information to the media later on, it can be noticed that Bellarmino did not take pleasure in explaining that she did not feel too deep a love for Maya to be hurt or to resort to murdering Zhang, something she categorically denied. But I suppose if this lends more credibility to her defense, she somehow felt compelled to come forward with this personal revelation to essentially save herself. She wanted it to be clear that she did not have any ill will towards Zhang, and therefore she also did not have any motive for murder. After Bellarmino's arrest, the police were confident in declaring their case as airtight, something I thought was a tad premature, to be honest. They maintained that on top of the CCTV footage, they had also witnesses that could corroborate what was shown on the footage. The police expressed their optimism that the case had indeed legs to stand on. What I found odd yet again, though, was that in a few interviews from the 8th of July, the police appeared to be encouraging Bellarmino to come clean about whether she had directly participated or not in Zhang's murder. I understood this to be a sign that maybe they had not really gotten the information they wanted from her when she was being interrogated. It is possible that by saying this type of thing in front of the press, they were hoping that Bellarmino would give them more information they believed she had. Is it possible, however, that indeed they weren't sure if Bellarmino was indeed involved or not? We don't know. But to me, the interviews felt like a bit of a Hail Mary, almost pleading for Bellarmino to say something that would help them in their murder investigation. It was hard to find any other resource that would clearly show what the police had done to make sure to either eliminate Bellarmino as a suspect or to build a solid case against her. Did they process her clothing? Did they again properly compare her tattoo to the one that was seen on the video footage? Did they check her for defensive wounds? Did they ask their witnesses to pick out Bellarmino from a person lineup? Did they perhaps check any alibis she might have had? It looked like that by the 8th of July, the police may or may not have done any of these, but if they did, they sure made it a secret instead of sharing things to the media like they have done so far. What the police did share, eventually to the media, was that they had apparently received intel from an anonymous source that explained to them what had happened inside of Zhang's car when she was being killed. According to the source, a man called M held Zhang's hands from the back, whilst the other person in the back started stabbing Zhang, presumably with an ice pick. This did not align with previous suspicions and theories that perhaps the female individual in the front was the one who did the stabbing or did it exclusively. The police also explained that the reason why they suspected that an ice pick was used instead of a knife or any other sharp object was that there was oddly an absence of a lot of blood at the crime scene. This did not make sense to me. Surely any other sharp object used to stab a living human being will create immense bleeding and a hastened death due to blood loss, so I had to look it up, and actually they were right. As it turns out, using an ice pick is quite a way to inflict pain and death without having to deal with a lot of blood. Since an ice pick creates deep puncture wounds instead of slashed wounds, the bleeding is generally way less than when you're being stabbed with a bladed object. I did not realize this was the case at all, but it makes sense now that I think about it. Now, do not go and use this information to plot your criminal acts. We're the good guys, remember? Now back to the story. The police dumped a lot of information on the 8th of July. We have heard about the ice pick, the 5 further suspects, and about the men with the aliases of M and Ad. Ad being the other guy in the back of Zhang's car. The police further added that they were also potentially looking at DNA evidence in order to firmly put Bellarmino at the crime scene as well. So, imagine my surprise when 2 days later, after all this information dumped from the police, they announced that they had released Bellarmino on the 9th of July. The charge brought against her on the 3rd of July was apparently dismissed due to insufficient evidence. After her release and during an interview, Bellarmino insisted that she was innocent and showed her hands to the press, showing that there were no wounds, implying that she could not have murdered anybody, let alone Zhang, because if she did, she would have sustained wounds from Zhang's attempts to defend herself. Bellarmino felt like she was being set up. She claimed that she was nowhere near the crime scene or anywhere where Zhang was. In fact, she was in a different part of town having drinks with friends. I have so many thoughts and did not find any sufficient and satisfying answers. Why would the police so easily release Bellarmino when they have hinted at so many things they wanted to do or things they should have done to further investigate the case in relation to Bellarmino's potential involvement? They mentioned DNA testing. Have they actually done it? Have they found trace DNA evidence that could be tested against Bellarmino's DNA? We do not know. The media certainly was not made aware of it. Did someone closely analyze and look at the tattoos? Bellarmino was of the strong opinion that someone had imitated her tattoo to set her up, and that is why the police thought she was the woman in the CCTV footage. I feel that this is a spectacular coincidence, and I cannot quite bring myself to believe this, and this is coming from me, who is quite a romantic believer in coincidences. Did the police not think that the reason Bellarmino did not have wounds on her was because she was not really stabbing Zhang, but could still be the mastermind of the crime and was definitely in the car, i.e., the crime scene? As you can remember, the police had an anonymous tip about how the men in the back of Zhang's car restrained and stabbed her, leaving the possibility that the female passenger in front was simply watching the scene unfold in front of her or directing the whole crime herself. My thought was, just because Bellarmino did not have any defense wounds does not mean that she was not there and that she was not involved at all. The only reason I could think of as to why the police released her so quickly was that her alibi about having a drink with friends in another part of town actually checked out completely. The police could therefore not place her at the crime scene. It did not help, of course, that the police were so tight-lipped as to why Bellarmino was released. Saying that there was insufficient evidence can mean so many different things, and it would have been helpful if the police tried to make their position clearer to the media and to the public. Following Bellarmino's release, the police in Calamba formed a special task group to further investigate Zhang's murder, showing to the public and the press that despite the setback, they were still very much keen on solving Zhang's case. However, Zhang's case became quiet after this. No one heard from the police, but Zhang's family did not stay quiet at all. Zhang's family expressed to the press that they wanted the police to investigate Maya, Zhang's girlfriend. Although Maya had always denied any involvement, Zhang's family insisted Maya and Zhang had a rocky relationship when they first got together, before Maya got together with Bellarmino and back with Zhang. Zhang's family was hinting at Maya potentially betraying Zhang by getting together with Bellarmino again, implying there was a love triangle, but that Maya was the one who had the intention to hurt Zhang. Maya pleaded with Zhang's family to stop their public denouncement of her because it was beginning to have negative effects not only on her but her family as well. Maya, like Bellarmino, insisted that she too did not have any wounds on her hands, so naturally, according to her, she could not have killed Zhang. Maya admitted that her relationship with Zhang was not free from problems, but these most definitely did not lead to her wanting to kill Zhang. Again, I would ask the same questions to the police as I did in Bellarmino's case. As it turns out, the police never arrested Maya, or at least we do not know of any other arrests following Bellarmino's release. At this point, the NBI, or the National Bureau of Investigation, had gotten involved, as maybe they felt the local police needed assistance in their efforts to investigate the case. 9 days after Zhang's family publicly asked the police to investigate Maya, a surprising twist in this case took place. On the 29th of July, reports came through to the media that Maya and a nephew of hers called Adrian Ramos were abducted from their family's compound in Laguna. The initial reports by the Laguna Police Public Information Office stated that 10 men were seen to forcibly take Maya and Adrian at around 12:20 in the afternoon on the 29th of July. Police did not discount the possibility that this was connected to Zhang's murder. Therefore, a parallel investigation was commenced in the hope of identifying the men and finding where both Maya and Adrian were as soon as possible. By the time the evening news came in, police had already obtained cell phone and CCTV footage of Maya and Adrian's abduction, It showed how men restrained and forcibly took the two in three vehicles. Witnesses from the family compound disclosed also that the men introduced themselves as being from court. They told Maya and Adrian they needed to get dressed as they were ordered to appear in court. Maya and Adrian's family also shared that they were scared by the armed men who at some point used their guns within the compound, firing at random to perhaps scare the people. The men also reportedly physically assaulted people, perhaps to intimidate them and prevent them from questioning their actions. So, the police had their hands full with two investigations now ongoing in relation to Zhang's case. And things got a tad more difficult when, on the 30th of July, it was reported that Adrian Ramos, Maya's nephew who was abducted with her, had been found dead roughly a month after Zhang was found dead. Adrian's body was dumped not too far away from where Zhang's body was left in her car. Coincidence? We will never know. The police reported that Adrian was found blindfolded and with a piece of cardboard near his body with some Filipino words written on it. Roughly translated in English, these words meant killer, pusher, as in drug pusher. I'm a hoodlum, do not be like me. Very incoherent, but clearly the message is very, very malicious. Upon closer inspection, it became quickly obvious to the police that Adrian was not killed where he was dumped. It is not clear from online resources that I used if the police ever found out where the primary crime scene was. The initial medical examination showed that Adrian's nose was broken and metal wires were wrapped around his neck, possibly to strangle him. He had stab wounds, and by all indications, it looked like Adrian suffered a great deal before dying. One thing could not be forgotten at this point. Maya was still missing, and the police still did not have any leads. Slowly but surely, the police's visibility in the media became less and less. By August, the police gave vague indications about having 6 witnesses in Maya and Adrian's abduction. There was no word who they were or what they knew or whether the police were acting upon their intel. The police said that Zhang's case was being put on the back burner and that they were even looking at the possibility of other motives for the killing, such as maybe a drug deal gone wrong. Again, this is adding to the already very long list of speculations that the police had since the beginning of the case investigation. The police went quiet for the rest of August and the whole of September 2020, only to state in October 2020 that they had in custody one unnamed individual who could shed some more light on Maya and Adrian's abduction. They apparently had found a mobile phone as well, which was used during the abduction and possible during Adrian's killing as well. It is not clear whether the police had ascertained who the owner of the phone was. Speculations in the media point out to the phone being possibly owned by Maya or Adrian himself. The police was also very tight-lipped about the contents of the phone, so the public was more or less kept in the dark about how the investigation into both the abduction and Zhang's killing were going. And so it remains like this to this date. No one really knows the status of the investigation. The police have not said anything substantial of late, and the nation's attention has turned to other crimes that have become sensationalized in the media. In the absence of substantial information by the police, and knowing that even the president wants this case resolved as quickly as possible, the public has jumped from one conspiracy theory to another. Seeing as how this case has developed in the 4 months it was prominently featured in the media, there are 2 distinct possibilities for the police's radio silence. Possibility A, they have either caught someone or several people. but are merely keeping quiet to allow themselves to build their case. They are also probably thinking, if we keep quiet now and come out with a big announcement later on, it will be very good for their reputation. And then there's option or possibility B. There are no leads at all. I fear that possibility B is more likely, as much as it pains me to say that. I just hope that Zhang's family will find some peace and will see justice served sooner rather than later. Like my mother used to say all the time, justice delayed is justice denied. And I would like to think that maybe this time the police will get it right and justice will be served despite some delay. And with that frustrating end to the story, I want to say thank you for listening to this seventh episode. I am sure this will not be the last that we will hear of this story. I will make sure to keep you updated. I made sure to set up a Google alert for myself using a few of the recurring terms, names, and words so that if something does come up, especially within the Filipino press, then I'll be alerted by Google. Hopefully, fingers crossed. If you spot any update before me, or if you hear anything, then please feel free to tag me on any of the social media accounts. Again, we are on Instagram at Lagim Podcast, on Twitter at Lagim Pod, on TikTok at Lagim Podcast, and on YouTube at Lagim Podcast. We are on Facebook. We have a discussion group there as well, so make sure to check those out as well. I am also happy to receive case suggestions. I have been asking people on Instagram, and the feedback so far has been very good. So please keep them coming. Also, do not forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts. Make sure to give us 5 stars over there and leave a comment behind. That can give this podcast a big boost if you do so. Lastly, I would just like to remind you that Lagim is on patreon.com and you can become a patron over there and support the podcast. You will have early access to regular episodes, and on top of that, you will have access to bonus episodes, Q&A episodes, and so it's definitely worth checking it out. Again, thank you very much. As per usual, come back in 2 weeks for another episode of Lagim, a Filipino True Crime Podcast. Maraming salamat at mabuhay.